Okay. I actually just got done watching the premiere for the first part of this. And... dang it. What was their username? Wes something. I can't remember exactly. I'm sorry. They donated $20. Holy shit. But yeah, if you like this series, I'd recommend liking the video. If you haven't already subscribed, feel to do so, because I'm gonna go through all the volumes. Anyway, let us continue. Hannelore, careless mumbles lead to dinner. And this is what caused the whole issue with Schwartz and Weiss between Dunkelfelger and Rosemont and the others in the first place. Yeah. Lady Hannelore, as I was leaving the small hall after my afternoon practical lessons, Cordula called out to me and walked over. She was the adult attendant I had brought with me to the Royal Academy and my head attendant back at home. We have a problem, milady. Let us return to the dormitory at once, she whispered in my ear. She was wearing such a bright smile that I almost struggled to believe her, but her eyes were even sharper than usual. Even in the face of such concerning news, she was slyly urging me to stay composed. So I would put on the most elegant smile I could manage and nodded in response. I wondered, do I look like a proper Greater Duchy Archduke candidate? Maybe. Although I had the manner of a Dunkelfelger Archduke candidate, my timing always left much to be desired, and my family often scolded me for not thinking or acting as was expected of my status. Gee, I wonder who else has to deal with that. Her and Rosemont do have some stuff in common besides books. I wasn't at all confident in my own abilities, and it seemed that I would never be able to act as competently as my older brother did. In fact, Professor Primavera of my court etiquette class had just told me that I lacked the dignity and intensity expected of a Greater Duchy's Archduke candidate, which explained why I was struggling to pass. Welcome back, Lady Hannelore. I returned to my room thinking it was quite unusual to see the dormitory so empty. Even the retainers who usually gathered to greet me were mostly absent. Have the upperclassmen not finished their lessons yet? I turned to Cordula, saw her wearing a broad smile, and immediately revised that theory. My retainer's absence was no doubt related to the problem she mentioned. So what in the world happened, I asked. Cordula's bright smile was suddenly tinged with concern. Lord Lestalot seems to have taken charge of the apprentice knights and marched them to the Ehrenfest dormitory. Why in the world did he do that? I exclaimed, my eyes wide in disbelief. He gave no indication of doing any such thing this morning. He intends to have Ehrenfest surrender the large shoe mills that attend the library to you, milady, so that you may be their master instead. He seems to think that as they are the heirlooms of royalty, they will do wonders to improve your image. So that's why he was wanting the shoe mills. Why he was wanting Schwartz and Weiss so badly was to give them to his sister. The fact that magic tools in the form of shoe mills had started assisting Professor Solange in the library had turned into a rather popular topic of conversation in the Royal Academy, as had the realization that an Archduke candidate from Ehrenfest was their master. According to our dormitory supervisor, Professor Roffin, these shoe mills were heirlooms of royalty that had been rendered inactive after losing their masters in the post-Civil War purge. Which is not incorrect. That is correct. I was very fond of shoe mills myself, and upon hearing the rumors, I had gone straight to the library to catch a glimpse of them. Seeing them assist Professor Solange in her usual duties was nothing short of adorable, and it seemed that I wasn't the only one who thought so. There had been many other girls looking at the shoe mills as well. It had come as quite a relief to know that so many others shared in my fascination. After returning to my dormitory, having had my fill of cuteness, I remember saying to Cordula, how adorable. If only I could be the master of such shoe mills myself. I certainly did say that, I muttered, but I hadn't intended for anyone to hear. I was just thinking aloud. That would have been fine under any other circumstances, Cordula replied, but on this one occasion, it seems your timing was outright unfortunate. Rosantark was passing by and overheard your mumbling. Rosantark was my cousin, as an arch-noble, and one of my brother's retainers. He had apparently reported to my brother that I wanted to be the shoe mill's master, and after I spent so long trying not to bother anyone... I can't believe this. I wasn't very confident in myself, and my weak-willed nature often led people to criticize my lack of grace and gravitas, but the thought of stealing mastery of the shoe mill from Ehrenfest Archduke candidate to remedy this had never even crossed my mind. Drawing that kind of attention to myself would only make my shortcomings as a Greater Duchy Archduke candidate that much more apparent. This must be a dreadful fright for Ehrenfest, I said. I cannot simply remain here. I must go and stop my brother. An ordinance arrived earlier from Prince Anastasius summoning Professor Roffin, Cordula noted, raising a hand to stop me. This is no longer a matter you can resolve, milady. I put my head in my hands without a second thought, bemoaning how long it had taken me to finish my classes. Had I passed during my previous lesson rather than today, I might have been around to prevent all this. Once again, Lady Handler, it was nothing more than a matter of unfortunate timing. Cordula, that does not make me feel any better. Everything is still my fault. I tried to think of something I could do, but Prince Anastasius had already summoned our dormitory supervisor. Rushing over and acting overly pushy wouldn't change anything. Instead, I had no choice but to wait for everyone to return, and when they eventually did, it was almost dinner time. I called my brother as soon as he appeared and demanded that he tell me what had happened, but he merely waved me away while saying we could talk over dinner. Trying to control the nervous fluttering in my chest, I made my way to the dining hall table with the others. Lestalot, this all happened because Rosentark told you something he shouldn't have, didn't he? Or didn't it? I asked, fixing my brother with the hardest glare I could manage. My apologies, Lady Handler, Rosentark interjected at once. My intentions were pure, I can assure you. I simply thought you would appreciate getting what you desired most. Tch. Rosentark was an apprentice knight and straightforward to a fault. We had known each other since we were little, so I couldn't doubt the good nature of his actions. He had quite genuinely wanted to realize my wish. That may be so, but I do not wish to take that which does not belong to us, nor am I pleased about causing a fuss like this. Even if your heart was in the right place, how can you justify stealing from another? We were not attempting to steal anything. Rather, we were trying to retrieve heirlooms of royalty. As much as Rosentark tried to excuse their actions, though, it didn't change that we would have been taking something from Ehrenfest. Enough, Lestalot said, waving a hand with a thoroughly displeased expression. The matter has already been settled. He clearly didn't want to have this conversation, but I was still none the wiser about what had taken place. You are the one who said we would discuss this over dinner, brother. Now, what in the world happened with Ehrenfest? Irritatingly enough, they refused to give mastery of the shoe mills to Dunkelfelder, he replied. A large-scale battle had apparently been on the verge of forming before the prince arrived and put a stop to things. Both our dormitory supervisors were called, and at Professor Roffin's suggestion, a game of dinner had been played to determine who got ownership of the shoe mills. It's nice to see Professor Roffin's love of dinner actually do some good. In the end, Ehrenfest had prevailed despite our dinner winning streak, and it was decided that Lady Rosemine would continue to have mastery over the shoe mills. I truly was relieved to know we hadn't ended up stealing those rights from Ehrenfest. It truly is repugnant that such a coward could declare herself a saint, Lestalot said, eating with a frustrated expression. Apparently he had ended up losing quite spectacularly after Lady Rosemine forced him into participating himself. Interestingly enough, he seemed to be the only one taking the defeat so poorly. Professor Roffin and the apprentice knights were all beyond themselves with excitement, and rather than criticizing Ehrenfest, they were actually praising Lady Rosemine. Lady Rosemine is by no means a coward, Lord Lestalot, Professor Roffin said gleefully. In treasure-stealing dinner, one must use all methods available to wrench victory from one's opponents. At the end of the day, she utilized a cute little surprise attack that was full of openings, a far cry from the devious plots that Ferdinand used to employ. She was acting like Ferdinand, but nowhere near as devious as he was. From there, Professor Roffin spoke at length about the dinner match, regaled us with stories about the genius schemer Lord Ferdinand who had managed to beat Dunkelfelder in the past, and started working on a new training regimen that would take effect from tomorrow onward. The apprentice knights spent this time discussing the various strategies Lord Ferdinand had utilized in bygone days, told to them by the older knights or their parents. They resolved to win against Lady Rosemine no matter what she attempted the next time they fought, and it seemed they were even more unified than usual. We must train and challenge Ehrenfest to a rematch at once. Professor Roffin, please do not bother Ehrenfest any more than we already have. Bother them? Not at all, Lady Handler. We're asking them to play dinner. According to Professor Roffin, dinner was something to be desired and celebrated, but it was hard to imagine most female Archduke candidates welcoming such challenges. I must be firm from here on out so I can stop both my brother and our dormitory supervisor from causing a mess next time. It was with that resolve in my heart that I finished my meal and exited the dining hall. I could hear the apprentice knights and those who had watched the dinner match having a rousing discussion about the game as I went. In any case, it's clear that Lady Rosemine is a very competent Archduke candidate, unlike me. Well, girl, you're more physically capable than she is, that's for sure, and that's saying something. Lady Rosemine had passed all of her classes on the first day, defeated Dunkelfelder in a game of dinner, and received the prince's approval to serve as master of the royal heirlooms. She was presumably the object of more attention than any other Archduke candidate right now. Before we had come to the Royal Academy, there had been rumors that Lady Rosemine might need to delay her studies by a year. She had apparently been poisoned during an ambush and needed to spend 2 years in a Jareve. She hadn't grown as much as the rest of us as a result, which should have put her at a disadvantage. But this didn't seem to be the case at all. In fact, her youthful appearance, like that of a child who had just been baptized, made her seem all the more impressive. Lady Rosemine had the most beautiful and refined features despite her young age, golden eyes that shone like the moon, and shockingly glossy hair the color of the night sky. On top of all that, she also wore hairpins that were unlike any that I had ever seen before. Even the other Dunkelfelder girls were desperate to know more, and their silent but intense pleading for me to finish my classes so that we could start socializing with her was impossible to ignore. I must meet Lady Rosemine in person and invite her to a tea party, but before that I must apologize for my brother's transgressions. This incident has no doubt caused her great offense, so I will need to take care of how I approach her. It was far from elegant to unearth buried drama, but my mumbling had caused a great deal of trouble for Ehrenfest. I wouldn't be able to rest easy until she heard my apology. That said, how can I go about meeting Lady Rosemine exactly? Under normal circumstances, I could have simply spoken to her during class since we were both first years, but she had already managed to pass every single lesson. It was as though my chances to meet with her had already slipped through my fingers, and the only class I ever see Lord Wolfried attend is the staff one. Ehrenfest is ranked 13th, but their Archduke candidates are simply too skilled. Luckily, our stat class was tomorrow, so I will be able to speak with Lord Wolfried then. I would need to probe him for information on when I might be able to meet with Lady Rosemine. Oh boy, here we go. Speaking of this... Roffent, Wondrous Ditter. Ditter is the means by which a person can win what they need and defend what they treasure. Lord Lestalot and Lady Rosemine had just guided the apprentice knights of their duchies in battle. The prize? Mastery over magical tools. The game? Treasure-stealing Ditter. The rules were a bit unusual, but it was the first time the game had been played in the Royal Academy for I don't know how many years. In each team's territory was its Archduke candidate, and they had to win through skill and knowledge. The very sight made my heart race with excitement. I think the last time that Treasure-stealing Ditter was played was more than likely when Ferdinand was attending the Royal Academy. So at least, 7-9 years? Because I'm assuming once he graduated at 15, he left, and then, I think he went to the temple at 18, I'm assuming, and was there for 2 years, and then Rosemine started going, and then it was about a year, and then 2 years later, the whole Jareve thing happened for 2 years, so he's assuming like 22, 23 at this point. So about 7-8 years. In each team's territory was its Archduke candidate, and they had to win through skill and knowledge. The very sight made my heart race with excitement, and it seemed the students had felt the same way, even those who had only speculated. I never even considered that we might lose, one apprentice knight said. I mean, we were only up against Ehrenfest. Our knights have so much more training under their belt, but Lady Rosemine's scheming flipped it all upside down, another agreed. It was enough to make my breath catch in my throat to think someone who looked so innocent have such a devilish mind. Well, she learned from the best. She learned from Lord Ferdinand himself. We're used to speed Ditter, but with this, we had no idea what was going to happen. That actually makes things a lot more exciting. Yeah, I'd never been this excited about a Ditter match before. It was completely different from the normal version. Some students seemed genuinely excited about the match, despite the fact their duchy had just lost. While others appeared to disagree with the results, one thing in particular had caught my attention, though. The way they compared treasure-stealing Ditter to what they were used to. Huh. I guess speed Ditter is considered the norm now. In the past, when someone mentioned Ditter, they were always referring to the treasure-stealing Ditter. But after the Civil War, treasure-stealing Ditter had become harder to play, and the Academy had ended up with no choice but to switch. It seemed that so many years had passed since then that students were now more accustomed to speed Ditter, which wasn't at all good in the long term. If we'd played normal Ditter, we would have won, one student said. A second student nodded in agreement and then turned to me. Professor Roffin, isn't it against the rules to ambush us while we're bringing the treasure back? In speed Ditter, that's like hiding behind us while the professor summons the Fey Beast and then attacks us the moment it appears. Some were evidently so focused on what they were used to that they were convinced Ehrenfest had cheated. I chuckled and shook my head. Speed Ditter only begins when the professor sends out the Fey Beast. You're right in that regard, but treasure-stealing Ditter starts the moment you start hunting the treasure. In other words, the match had already begun. They didn't cheat at all. And he's not wrong. Those are the rules of treasure-stealing Ditter. A number of students didn't seem satisfied with my answer. I snorted. By having such a soft mindset, they were pretty much asking for one of the knights who had played treasure-stealing dinner back at the Interduchy tournament to give them a good scolding. You know how the dinner played at the Interduchy tournament changed from treasure-stealing dinner to speed dinner due to population problems, right? I said. Before that, there were even crueler tacticians, men who constantly ambushed the apprentice knights as they looked for treasure, continued malicious attacks and tricks on their duchies until the very moment their duchy lost, and threw the Interduchy tournament into chaos without fail. Are you talking about the Lord of Evil? The man who focused not on making his duchy win, but causing chaos and ensuring that the expected winner lost? Yep, that's Ferdinand, all right. That's right. Do you know the details? I asked, recalling that the topic had come up among the first years during class. It had been when Hersher described Lady Rosemine as the man's disciple, from what I remembered. My uncle told me about him, a student said. He won against half of the other duchies by traveling around in a party of 2 or 3 knights, and crushing groups of maybe 5 or 6 that went out for treasure. He also used cruel magic tools that brought his opponents within an inch of their lives, and destroyed or even stole rejuvenation potions from others, refusing to return them unless they dropped out of the game. But surely not all of the stories could be true, could it? I imagine that they all are. I grinned to myself, realizing that the Lord of Evil had become something of an old wives' tale to the older knights. The best part was that all the stories were in fact true. Ferdinand outdid himself. After all, the more accurate the stories got, the more you should be agonizing over how merciless he was to his enemies. And that Lord of Evil just so happens to be Lady Rosemine's guardian, Lord Ferdinand, I said. According to Ehrenfest's dormitory supervisor, they're like teacher and student. What? Back then, the bulk of one's socializing time had been spent preparing for treasure-stealing dinner. The week lesser duchies would gather intel and figure out which greater duchy to form a united front with, while greater duchies put their all into figuring out each other's plans. It had essentially been tradition for lesser and middle duchies to serve under greater duchies in a free-for-all battle of glorious skill. Of course, through the use of devious trickery, this tradition had been turned on its head, and by none other than Lord Ferdinand, who had at the time been an Archduke candidate from Ehrenfest. He would attack a greater duchy squad as it left to secure Fabius as treasure, inform the middle duchy serving them of his success to seduce them in launching a betrayal, and then subsequently smash the greater duchy to bits while annihilating the lesser duchies scattering from the fallout. That wasn't to say that his plots always resulted in a victory for Ehrenfest. In fact, he was often so focused on attacking other duchies that he devoted few troops and very little attention to protecting his own treasure, meaning his duchy never won. Ooh. Oh dear. Even so, his influence on dinner couldn't be overstated. Wow, Ferdinand. Really? Seriously? In retaliation, the apprentice scholars had desperately started to research new magic tools to guard against their opponents' surprise attacks, and reinforce their own. It was hard to believe now, but many exceedingly violent magic tools had been invented for and revealed during treasure-stealing dinner at the Interduchy tournament, whereupon duchies would purchase them later for Fabius hunting at home. Incidentally, Lord Ferdinand had been an exceptionally skilled apprentice scholar himself, as well as Hersher's disciple. He had made new magic tools each year for his ambushes, and the others he produced were always in very high demand. His presence meant that even the apprentice attendants had needed to remain alert at all times to gather intelligence and secure supply lines, and the customers at the Interduchy tournament were more lively and numerous due to the excitement of the winning duchy changing each year. Compared to his intricate plots and the way he threw all the other duchies into bloody chaos without a moment's hesitation or mercy, Lady Rosemine's little surprise attacks were nothing more than child's play. You call them child's play, but Lady Rosemine's strategies were positively magnificent, Clarissa protested, almost champing her teeth as she argued. She was a well-known scholar of the sword. It was a Dunkelfelder tradition to have scholars prioritize combat over books, and was shaking her head in such a passionate disagreement that her scorched brown braids swung from side to side. After failing the night exam for being too short and weak, seeing such a tiny girl made a fool out of our apprentice knights has absolutely inspired me. The vast majority of our duchy students wanted to be knights, but we couldn't let them all take the knight's course. We needed attendants and scholars too. Thus, there was a selection exam held from one's baptism to the day they entered the Royal Academy. Those who failed but still trained to match as much as any knight were called scholars or attendants of the sword. They had wanted to become knights more than anything, and in a way they were more attached to dinner than the apprentice knights themselves. Who else would think to guard their treasure inside their high beast? Clarissa continued, her Dunkelfelder blue eyes burning with passion as she clenched her fist and continued singing Lady Rosemine's praises. I mean, how many knights have more mana than an Archduke candidate? Really? Basically none. The guts she had to participate in a sudden, unplanned game of treasure-stealing dinner makes her fit to be a general. Fit to lead countless knights. Putting aside their pros and cons, the fact that she came up with plots that could actually be used in battle, and at such short notice, shows just what a quick thinker she is. There's no doubt that Lady Rosemine's intellect is her greatest weapon. So she's got guts, and she's a quick thinker, huh? It seemed that while some apprentice knights were exhibiting enough grace to praise their enemy after losing, and others were trying to figure out what they themselves lacked, Clarissa was focusing on something else entirely. I'm told you suggested this game of dinner out of the blue, Professor Roffin, she continued. That means the match happened without warning. You say that tactician of the past was great, but Lady Rosemine didn't even have the chance to prepare magic tools like he did. And even then she was able to form such a complex strategy before the game began, using only the magic tools she had at hand. I just can't. Her eyes were now burning so passionately that even I found it a little off-putting. But many of the other students were agreeing with her. I coolly acknowledged the fires burning in their hearts and chewed over what Clarissa had said. It certainly isn't easy to make a scheme in a short amount of time and with such a limited tools. In the past, spats between the Interduchy tournament hadn't been all that unusual, and Lord Ferdinand had attended the Royal Academy during the midst of the Civil War, when a fight always seemed to be lurking around the corner. Back then, everyone had carried weapons and secret magic tools to use in emergencies. After the war, however, the entire country had been greatly weakened. Duchies had stopped fighting among themselves, although not really by choice, they simply lacked the strength and resources to continue. Life in the Royal Academy had become a lot less dangerous as a result, so students didn't walk around with that many magic tools anymore. For the past few years, not even apprentice knights had had experience playing treasure-stealing dinner or making schemes, I muttered, and yet she managed to come up with several using nothing more than her high beast and the tools she had with her. How did she manage that, I wonder? Are those really skills that can be taught? Maybe she's just a dinner prodigy? Of course she is, Clarissa exclaimed, her nose flaring. She's a saint of Ehrenfest, you know. She looks that young because she spent 2 whole years in the Dereve, which meant she's 2 years behind in her education, too. She couldn't have learned anything while she was asleep. Clarissa was right, and that realization left me blinking in surprise. Back when Ob Ehrenfest had requested for Lady Rosemine to attend with special arrangements, we professors had simply hoped that she wouldn't fail and need to drop out immediately. Of course, she had then massively exceeded our expectations by passing all of her classes on the first day. A feat so blindingly brilliant that we hadn't actually stopped to consider the deeper implications. Lady Clarissa, are you suggesting that Lady Rosemine has been honing her talent for warfare since birth? I asked. I was a bit suspicious about it up until now, but one of her retainers said she was adopted by Ehrenfest's Archduke due to having an abundance of mana. She was the daughter of the Knight Commander, so perhaps she was trained in battle from a young age? No. Even if you're going with the backstory here, she was raised in the temple. There's no way she would have been able to do that. And if the Lord of Evil took her as his disciple, maybe he trained her and did her? No, you guys are assuming things. All you gotta do is ask Ferdinand, but even then I think he would still say he did just to make them sweat. The students grew excited as they came up with theories to explain how Lady Rosemine had come to be so talented. Of course, Clarissa was the most impassioned among them. If she were a Dunkelfelder Archduke candidate, I would swear loyalty to her right here and now, she declared. It reminded me of the apprentice knights of my day, who had stomped their feet with frustration that Lord Ferdinand hadn't been born in Dunkelfelder. And why not just win the heart of one of her retainers, I suggested, holding back the urge to laugh at such fond memories. How would that work? I don't want to marry into Ehrenfest. I want to serve Lady Rosemine, and no one who's ever married into Dunkelfelder has gone out to serve a member of the Archducal family, have they? It's not common, no, but you might be able to negotiate your way into accompanying her to the Archduke conference. It's not entirely unheard of. Although I think you need some time to cool your head first. You're getting too worked up about all this, I said, and then turned to the students who were still eagerly theorizing about Lady Rosemine's education. And that goes for you lot, too. There's no point doing all this speculating. I mean, why do you think apprentice scholars exist? Why do attendants hold tea parties? Your delusions are worthless, especially when the truth is within our reach. Everyone shut their mouths at my criticism, but the fires were still raging in their eyes. I couldn't let those flames die out. With some expert guidance, the students would all grow in their areas of interest. All of Ehrenfest withdrew his request for Lady Rosemine to be given a special environment at the end of autumn. And since then, she has won in dinner, attained first-in-class status, and started spreading several new trends. These are the facts we know. Professor Pauline told me that Lady Rosemine also met Prince Anastasius at one of her tea parties, so we can assume that her personal influence is going to rise even faster than from next year onward. Now, this is just a theory, and a theory is nothing but a delusion without evidence to back it up. Starting tomorrow, you lot need to start gathering intelligence on Lady Rosemine. That way, all these excited speculations of yours can be based on concrete facts. Yes, sir, the apprentice scholars of the sword shouted in response, while the apprentice attendants began planning to hold tea parties for Ehrenfest. We shouldn't have any trouble inviting Lady Rosemine to a tea party, one apprentice scholar noted. Since Ehrenfest is a neutral duchy, and she's an archduke candidate the same age as Lady Hannelore, what if we help her spread trends in return for her telling us things? Sir, inviting her to tea parties wouldn't be unnatural, an apprentice scholar replied. Lady Rosemine and Lady Hannelore should already be socializing at least a little, since they're in the same classes. We also know that Lady Hannelore has been concerned about us bothering Ehrenfest before, so we could frame this meeting as a good way for her to apologize. She would almost certainly be behind the idea then. There was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air, and the apprentice scholars and attendants seemed to speak with a sense of urgency that had long been missing. It was great. You apprentice knights need more practice playing treasure-stealing dinner, I said. Make sure Dunkelfelger doesn't lose another game. The apprentice knights roared in response. I would increase their training regimen from tomorrow onward, using a rematch with Ehrenfest as encouragement, and start going through treasure-stealing dinner strategies with them. I also intend to use this opportunity to probe the Royal Academy about having the night course shift away from speed dinner and back to the treasure-stealing kind. I'll ask the other professors about it tomorrow. We dormitory supervisors headed out right after breakfast to start preparing for our classes. It was as I made my way to the night building that I saw a familiar woman walking ahead of me. Frau Alarm, the dormitory supervisor of Ehrenbach. She spoke in a shrill voice and tended to rant for what seemed like an eternity once she got going. I slowed down, hoping to avoid the tedium that came with getting ensnared in her web. My efforts were in vain, however. She soon turned around and spotted me. Oh my, good morning, Professor. Good morning, Roffen, she said. I was informed that Dunkelfelger lost to Ehrenfest in dinner the other day. Is that true, I wonder? She asked, smirking as if extremely pleased about her defeat. She wouldn't be the only one, I wagered. Maybe I should tell the apprentice knights not to fall for taunts and get wrapped up in fights, or maybe I should do the opposite and advise them to start more fights. That way both duchies involved would get more experience with treasure-stealing dinner. The first-year Archduke candidate Lady Rosemine displayed incredible leadership skills, I replied. We are grateful that she identified our weak points, and the apprentice knights are... My, Lady Rosemine took charge, you say? But that position of authority should belong to a man, to Lord Wolfried no less, Fraulein exclaimed with an exaggerated look of shock. Her overcritical tone reminded me of the rumor that she had been attacked by Lady Rosemine's high beast. In other words, saying anything complimentary about the young Ehrenfest student didn't seem very wise. Sensing my mistake, I noted that Lord Wolfried had been absent and swiftly changed the subject. As I feared, the change in curriculum following the Civil War is finally starting to show its cracks. Just what do you mean by that? Are you saying the new professors and courses are inadequate? Fraulein demanded, grimacing with clear displeasure. Only then did I remember that she herself had been hired after the Civil War. It seemed that I touched a nerve. She's such an annoying person to talk to. Oh, thank goodness, somebody else doesn't enjoy talking to her. In the night course, I clarified at once, I feel that playing speed dinner in the Underduchy tournament is encouraging students to focus so much on attack power that they forget to hone any other skills. They're getting too comfortable, and there is much they should learn that they have not. I think it'd be best if we return to, my, too comfortable, you say, Fraulein exclaimed, interrupting me again. I put my guard, unsure what had spurred her wrath this time, but instead of saying anything more, she just started mumbling to herself. Has she just figured out something to do with her research? Professor of the Scholar course tended to be at least partially focused on their research at all times, or so whenever something came up that seemed even the slightest bit useful, they would abandon everything to pursue it. I spent a lot of time with all sorts of professors in the Royal Academy, so unfortunately for me, I was used to this kind of peculiar behavior. I could probably go on ahead to class now, so yes, sneak away. It'd be simple to pass by her, but if you broke the focus of a scholar professor deep in thought, they tended to get up in your face and complain about it for days. You had to be careful. I tried sneaking away, but Fraulein suddenly clapped her hands together. Shoot, you missed your chance. Roffen, I agree with you entirely. We professors must rethink many things to prevent our students from becoming too comfortable. I thank you ever so much for your exceedingly wise insight. Oh, I don't like that. And with that, she walked off, seemingly in a very good mood all of a sudden. I didn't have a clue what kind of thoughts had been running through her head, but I was glad she was gone. I patted my chest for relief and headed to the Night's dormitory. I don't like that she was happy. I've got a feeling she's scheming something. Those stubborn idiots! I had spoken to the other professors on the night course about our dinner game against Ehrenfest, how apprentice knights were growing increasingly incompetent, and the dangers that came from them not knowing the thing about treasure-stealing dinner. My points had been pretty solid, but they had just said treasure-stealing dinner puts too much of a burden on lesser duchies. Why do you think we changed the coursework in the first place? In other words, the stubborn professors had shot down my idea without a second thought. If the students can't do proper night work at the Royal Academy, why do the professors think they'll be able to do it once they get back to their home duchies? Agreed. A portion of the funding for Royal Academy classes came from the sovereignty, while the rest came from individual duchies. Naturally, greater duchies provided the most, while lesser duchies provided only a small amount. And yet the students all received the same education. How did these professors not realize that treasure-stealing dinner was best for those from lesser duchies who wouldn't be able to play it at home? Playing here was the best way for them to get experience. Still, dwelling on the matter wouldn't change the fact that they had refused. It was better to focus on the things I can make happen on my own. If changing the Royal Academy's policies was too ambitious, I just needed to start within my own sphere of influence. Why don't you try and get send a message to Prince Anastasius and ask if he can talk to his dad about it? Send your points his way and maybe he might agree. Who knows? Guess I'll just have to make sure Dunkelferger gets trained properly at least. The apprentice knights were already excited about improving in treasure-stealing dinner, and I didn't want to waste this opportunity. Thankfully, the Dunkelferger dormitory had its own training grounds. We could easily train there. Once my classes for the day were over, I returned to the dormitory and gathered the apprentice knights just outside the training grounds. I instructed them to split into 2 teams and practice playing treasure-stealing dinner, but no sooner had they started than an ordnance shot past me. I furrowed my brow, wondering who had sent it and whom they had sent it to. One of my questions didn't remain unanswered for long. Lord Lestalot entered with his retainers and looked over the 2 groups of apprentice knights. Robin, stop this foolishness and have them trade in speed dinner, he said. Ranking highly in the Interduchy tournament is clearly more important than this. We must defeat Ehrenfest, is that understood? What do you think he's training for, dude? He wants to be able to have your knights defeat Ehrenfest in a rematch at some point, and what are you guys going to be playing? Treasure-stealing dinner. Duh! He was speaking with the arrogant attitude he'd so consistently adopted, but that wasn't good at all. The knights learning to coordinate, think, and properly grow strong was infinitely more important than the Interduchy tournament rankings. I have to strongly disagree, I called as he turned and made his way to leave. Treasure-stealing dinner and speed dinner are entirely different. Both require unique skill sets. Why would you say that treasure-stealing dinner practice is irrelevant? Treasure-stealing dinner is out of date. It will never be popular now. Despite the dinner game back then having been incredible enough to open the eyes of the apprentice knights, it seemed that the hearts of our Archduke candidates remained unmoved. Lord Lestalot was uncooperative, and since Lady Hannelore hadn't seen the match, all she had to contribute to the matter was asking me to please stop bothering Ehrenfest. How am I supposed to feel good about the future when our very own Archduke candidate are acting like this? Well, Hannelore can't really do anything because she didn't see the match, but, you gotta get Lestalot's attitude changed. I wanted Lord Lestalot to learn from Lady Rosamund, who carefully analyzed her allies' faults and her enemies' strengths, such that she could praise her foes even after emerging victorious. At this rate, our students are going to get so drunk on our tournament win streak that we'll end up losing all over again. It was only a matter of time before we came tumbling down. Dinner is not meant to be practiced for slaying Fabius, I argued. It is training for a battle in which one expends all they have to obtain what they want or protect what they hold dear. Having offensive strength does not immediately guarantee one's victory. Do you not understand this? Lord Lestalot grimaced, making no attempt to hide his displeasure. It was a silent order for me to hold my tongue, but I continued nonetheless. He needed to understand this. He needed to face his defeat head-on and learn from it. Not just for his own sake, but for the sake of Dunkelfelger's future. I suggested treasure-stealing dinner back then because I wanted to see how Ehrenfest would respond, I revealed. What do you mean, Lord Lestalot asked, blinking in surprise. Until recently, Ehrenfest has prioritized going with the flow above all else. It remained neutral during the Civil War and followed any orders it received from the top-ranking duchies without fail. In this case, however, Ehrenfest showed an iron resolve to maintain its place even when Dunkelfelger, the second-ranked duchy, joined up with many of the duchies, ordered its compliance. You are an Archduke candidate, Lord Lestalot. Did you not feel that was strange? Did you think Lady Rosemine was being an annoying brat and nothing else? Presumably, Lord Lestalot, having given the situation much thought, he crossed his arms and glared at me, indicating that I should continue. I could tell that he didn't like what I was saying, but it found it meaningful enough to be worth hearing. We don't know what value Aeronfest is deriving from the library's magic tools, I explained. Lady Rosemine said she would rather have an archnoble librarian be their master, and that she would give them to one who frequently visited the library to supply them with mana. She also said that she would never give them to someone who couldn't care for them properly, even if that person was a Dunkelfelger Archduke candidate. The more important these tools are to Aeronfest, the more they need to be able to protect them. And that is why you suggested we play treasure-stealing dinner? Ideally, the heirlooms of royalty would be protected by those strong enough to ensure their safety. It would be dangerous to leave them with Aeronfest, a member of no faction, if they did not even have the strength to protect them. Lord Lestalot sniffed. So in short, you used us to test whether they were strong enough to protect those heirlooms. I wouldn't put it quite so harshly. As your dormitory supervisor, Lord Lestalot, I did intend to help you. And although I did wish to see how Aeronfest would respond at the time, I saw no reason to believe Dunkelfelger might lose. My taunting made Lord Lestalot grit his teeth. Indeed, nobody had expected Aeronfest to seize victory. It was likely that even Prince Anastasius had determined it was better for Dunkelfelger to have the magic tools as members of the victorious side of the Civil War than a duchy that had refrained from taking sides. However, I continued, in contrast to the expectations of all, Aeronfest won. Do you know why that is? Of course, they won because they used deceitful and downright cowardly tactics rather than fighting directly and courageously. Had it not been for her evil tactics, we clearly would have won. Correct, I replied with a nod. Lord Lestalot stared at me through narrowed eyes, trying to discern my true intentions. Were you not praising those evil tactics just moments ago, he asked. She used brains to make up for her duchy's lack of brawn, pushed magic tools to their limits, and formed a plot to ensure victory. In other words, she embraced the heart of treasure-stealing dinner. If you want to know why the battle ended as it did, the answer is simple. Dunkelfelger has grown too used to the ways of Speed Dinner, while Lady Rosemine likely knew nothing of Speed Dinner and simply sought ways to secure her victory. Of course, that hadn't been the only reason for her success. The crafty plots she came up with, one after another, had been more masterful than anyone would expect from a first-year Archduke candidate. Do you know what makes Speed and treasure-stealing dinner so different, Lord Lestalot? Do you know what they were originally intended to serve as training for? Yes, of course, Lord Lestalot replied, raising an eyebrow in apparent frustration that I would ask something so obvious. Speed Dinner was a competition to see who could most efficiently hunt the growing number of fey beasts within the duchy, was it not? Surely nothing is more important to knights than improving their skills to quickly and decisively eliminate such threats. Well, yes. I nodded and said, however, my voice now loud enough that all the apprentice knights in the training ground could hear. Fey beasts generally act according to their species. They do not vary from the expected, so hunting them tends to make one's fighting style uniform. That is why our modern apprentice knights have no idea what to do when unexpected events occur, and not our chain of command crumbles. And you believe this is why we lost? Yes, to a considerable degree. Unlike summoned fey beasts, the enemies in treasure-stealing dinner are human beings as well. One must think hard and carefully to avoid defeat. Consider what could be done to flip the situation around, or what traps the enemy is likely to set. It was completely different from hunting formulaic fey beasts. You have no idea what plots your enemies were coming up with, or what magic tools they had. Sure, there were general strategies and rules of thumb for battle, but rarely would your opponent actually follow them. As your match against Aeronfest has demonstrated, I continued, knights don't go collectively stronger by rushing to kill summoned fey beasts in a controlled environment. As the future Ob of Dunkelfelger, you shall understand what makes this lack of progress so dangerous. Do you mean to say I should embrace the schemes of cowards simply because treasure-stealing dinner is a way of preparing for battles over the foundation of one's duchy? Lord Lestalot asked, glaring at me. I'm not saying that you need to embrace them. I just want you to know that it's pointless to complain about them after you inevitably lose. Treasure-stealing dinner served as a way for archdukes to practice coordinating and fighting with their knights. It encouraged them to think as hard as they could about how to protect something, a skill that would prove crucial if their foundation one day became the target of another duchy. Complaining about cowardice and evil was all too well and good in times of peace, but it wouldn't do anything to help reclaim stolen land. Of course, that was assuming they were even afforded time to complain. In most cases, an archducal family had lost its duchy. In most cases, an archducal family that lost its duchy was swiftly executed. Roffin, Lord Lestalot shouted, suddenly red-faced. He whipped out his staff, causing a stir to run through the apprentice knights, but I simply whipped out of my own and continued taunting him. Lord Lestalot, you rebuked the apprentice knights for their defeat, but I didn't see you trying to lead your duchy as Lady Rosemine did. Are you not ashamed? Can you really call yourself the next Ob of Dunkelfelder? How dare you? Schwert. Lord Lestalot morphed his staff into a sword and charged at me. Do you mean to say I'm not fit to be the next Archduke? Everyone stand down. Schwert. I avoided his attack, then morphed my own staff into a sword. Those around us let out cries of surprise and hurriedly backed away. Did you really gain nothing from that game of dinner except petulant anger? He offered no response. If so, there's no way I could deny that you lack the self-awareness and mindset required of a proper Ob, Lord Lestalot. Silence. Lord Lestalot swung at me again and again, his movements sharp. He was fairly strong, as one would expect, since he trained on a more regular basis than the Archduke candidates of other duchies, but that still wasn't enough to beat me, a professor of the night course. He worked on honing his skills more than most, but I trained every day and night, not to mention he was entrusting so much to anger that he was fighting even more sloppily and predictable than he did during our usual training. If an Archduke loses their duchy, they have nothing, I roared. That was why apprentice knights had always trained through treasure-stealing dinner, a form of mock war. So yeah, essentially, it's fake war, but you have to treat it like you're actually dealing with war here. Do you not understand this? Knights need to train to protect their duchy. Half the Dunkelfelder knights simply remained calm. Lady Rosemine's plots could have been dealt with easily. That's why they needed more training, to be able to deal with even the unexpected. It seemed that my pleas hadn't worked on Lord Lestalot, however. With gritted teeth and a ferocious glitter, he adjusted his grip on his sword. That's all talk of the past, he snarled. Jurgen Schmidt doesn't have the strength required for another war. There's no point in us training for one. That's not the point here. It might not have the strength for another war, but it doesn't mean one's not going to happen. You had to be ready just in case it does. There was some truth to his words. The Civil War and Purge had indeed crippled the entire country, and not a single duchy had the leeway to target another's land. At the moment, even if such an attempt proved successful, the extra territory would only be an immense burden. At the very least, I could commend the fact that members of the Archducal family clearly saw what a tragic situation the country was in. You seem so certain that the situation our country is in will continue forever, I said. And that's precisely why you're still a kid. What? Lord Lestalot swung down hard, allowing me to briskly knock his weapon from his hands. His eyes locked on his blade as it spun through the air, and I used this opportunity to grab him by the cape, flip him around, and pin him to the ground. If you let your guard down, Lord Lestalot, your duchy's foundation will soon belong to another. Events of such enormous importance that flip the very world on its head always happen when one lets their guard down. Back when I was a student, nobody had expected a civil war to happen and cripple the country. At the time, the second prince had received the Grutscheit, and everyone had assumed he would take over as king. That is, before he suddenly died, right after the king he was meant to succeed. The Grutscheit had then been lost, and the civil war had occurred. Around 10 years had passed since then, with the civil war, the purge, and so on, all having led to this moment. Nobody could say that another equally great change might not happen again. Dunkelfelder is the Zent's sword, I said. Above all else, we need the power to react to any situation at a moment's notice. Roffin, had that game of treasure-stealing dinner been real dinner, you would have lost your troops, your duchy, and even its foundation to Ehrenfest Lord Lestalot. He's not wrong. After helping Lord Lestalot to his feet, I fixed him with as stern a look as I could manage. I wanted him to understand. I needed him to agree. If you cannot face your defeat against Lady Rosemine and use it as fuel to improve, then when you one day become the Ob, you will only repeat your mistakes, I concluded. You must not interfere with the training of the apprentice knights. Instead, spend your time learning to become an Ob fit for Dunkelfelder. We stared at each other for a while until eventually Lord Lestalot turned to depart. The attendants of the sword will suffice as my guards in the dormitory. Guard knights remain here. I entrust the training of my guard knights and the rest of the apprentices to you. So it shall be done. I did say I would try and make it an hour, but I don't know if I got it in an hour. Close. Wolfried, an inelegant time at the Royal Academy. I couldn't deny the immense regret I was feeling over my actions. But who can blame me? Rosemine always showed a ton of motivation when baited with the library. Wouldn't anyone think about using that to ensure all the first years passed their lessons? That had been my thought process at the time, but in truth it was pure greed. Rosemine had become an even crueler teacher than Uncle. Ooh, that's saying something. She had cut down on her sleep, provided documents analyzing everyone's weak points, and ordered everyone to pass on their first day with an uncomfortable, intense smile. I even sympathized with the Roderick of the former Veronica faction, despite them being our enemies, and when I scolded Rosemine for going too far, she just looked at me with confusion. I mean, didn't you forbid me from going to the library specifically so that I could push everyone and make them pass as soon as possible, she had said. Need I repeat that I said I was putting my all into this? Oh no. She can't be stopped. Whatever shall we do, Lord Wilfrid, one of my retainers asked me. If we do not stop Lady Rosemine, the first years may be traumatized. Yes, I know that already. The problem is I don't know how to stop her. That's the problem. You can't stop her. I cradled my head, desperately trying to think of a way to halt Lady Rosemine's rampage. I was used to her being exceedingly competent and able to instruct anyone, even nobles, traits that had made her something of a role model to me. This was my first time seeing her go this berserk, and in truth I had no idea what to do about it. Lord Wilfrid, Lord Cornelius is asking what we intend to do, my retainer said. According to him, there's no way to stop Lady Rosemine once the library becomes involved. He's asking me? I mean, he's her blood relative. If not even he knows, what chance do I have? If only Rosemine and I had spent more time together. Ah, that's it. Uncle. Uncle knew more about Rosemine than I did, so I wrote a letter to him asking what I could do to stop her. I was sure he'd have some ideas. Deliver this to the knights guarding the teleportation hall, I said when I was done. Tell him it's urgent. Understood, my apprentice attendant. Isidore said and ran off with the letter in hand. We have a response from Lord Ferdinand. Let me see it, I said, taking the board from Ignaz and reading it at once. The contents made me want to put my head in my hands even more. Oh, Uncle, this isn't the answer I wanted. Lord Wilfrid, what does it say? My retainers asked. Their eyes were brimming with hope, and it pained me to see them still thinking there was a chance he might resolve things. I turned the board around and thrust it out so they could read for themselves. Do you have no apprentice scholars among your retainers? This is to say, is your retinue so incompetent that not a single one of them knows how to structure a letter properly? Teach them some sense, or at the very least learn to write structured letters on your own so that you may ask these questions. What? At the end of this beautifully written letter was the actual advice, if you could even call it that. The library can be both medicine and a deadly poison when it comes to Rosemine, and like medicine, you must dole it out to her in carefully measured amounts. An incompetent fool who attempts to use her interest to exploit her not knowing how to manage her is doomed to have their efforts blow up in their face. Had the library not been involved, a book would have served as an adequate distraction, but unfortunately for you, this is not an option here. The first years have no choice but to finish the death march you have started them on. If you need a bright side to this otherwise bleak situation, first-year written lessons are not difficult at all. They should manage. So he says, Ignaz remarked as he finished rereading the letter. But there is far too much content to memorize all at once. Uncle had Rosemine memorize it all after spending 2 years asleep, I replied. He must be basing his estimate on her instead of a normal first year. More than likely, yes. Despite having spent 2 years in a Derive, Rosemine had easily managed to learn everything covered in the first-year course and was now teaching the other first years. Uncle seemed to be assuming we were all capable of such an extraordinary feat, so he presumably thought that all we needed to do was assist the other students with their weak points. Both Lady Rosemine and Lord Ferdinand genuinely think anyone can pass, I see, Ignaz muttered. Yep, I'm going to have to apologize for the first years. Yes, you are. In the end, Rosemine successfully hammered the coursework into the first years, and while some had more or less been crying onto their test papers, everyone was able to pass. It was an achievement that earned us a lot of praise and attention from the other duchies, but we weren't proud. We were just exhausted and relieved it was over. Much to our dismay, however, Rosemine's shenanigans didn't end there. She was accused of attacking a professor with her high beast when that never happened, went missing while looking for her divine will, became the master of 2 magic tools while registering in the library, attained the highest grades in her class while simultaneously passing faster than anyone else, and started holding up in the library. She also managed to pick a fight with another duchy while measuring clothes, win a game of dinner while I almost died of anxiety in the dorm, receive a direct summons from a prince, begin socializing with an archduke candidate from a greater duchy, receive another summons from a prince despite venturing only to the library and come back from her meeting, with him unconscious after passing out midway through it. For each new predicament, I was at a complete loss and sent more questions to Ehrenfest. All the classes except my staff class were finally over. But Uncle was correcting and returning my reports on such a regular basis that it felt as though my studies hadn't even come close to ending. Writing reports that met his standards was a lot harder than passing classes. Still, my cousins in the higher grades hadn't yet finished their lessons, so my one reassurance as I wrote letter reports about Rosemine was that I wouldn't need to attend tea parties for a little while longer. "We did it, Lord Wilfrid," Ignaz exclaimed one day, beaming as he brought me another response from Lord Ferdinand. He had apparently gotten it from the knight by the teleportation hall on his way to see me. "Has he actually said something of use this time?" I asked. Rosemine had gone to the library only to be taken away by Prince Anastasius and pass out in a meeting that her retainers hadn't been permitted to attend. My most recent report to Uncle had detailed all this and asked for some guidance on how to deal with the prince, and how excited Ignaz seemed to be. The response must have been valuable. I reached out to accept it, at which point my retainer went, and averted his gaze. Oh no, what? Lord Ferdinand did not send our report back to us with words of criticism. In his letter, he sent that he was very satisfied with our writing, so, what about his actual answer? My emotions stormed as I read through the report. On the one hand, I was glad that Uncle had finally recognized my abilities, but on the other, I was conflicted because that was not the point of the reports. My eyes flitted across the text. Just as Ignaz had said, Uncle praised the structure of our letter with his usual perfect handwriting. At the end, however, was a single message. "As soon as Rosemine recovers, order her to return to Ehrenfest." "They're making Rosemine return home?" I said. "It's a shame, isn't it? We can finally write proper reports, but now there won't be anything for us to report on." "I don't think that's something to be disappointed about," I said, shaking my head at him before looking over Uncle's responses again. There was no mistaking about it. Rosemine was being ordered back to Ehrenfest. Well, at least I can get some time to myself once she's gone. I was sure that I could spend the time I had thus far spent writing reports on my hobbies and socializing instead. I stood up envisioning the elegant, comfortable days ahead. Oh, you are a poor little boy. You are so screwed. Externally grateful to my father and the others for having sent this order, it was only later that I realized my days of comfort were little more than a pipe dream. Instead, I was going to be spending my time cleaning up the messes Rosemine had made. Oh boy. Okay. I was able to make it, I think, at least an hour, maybe? Anyway, I will see everybody in the next one.